Welcome to U.S. History, and today is the lesson from Unit 1 on diversity in the colonies. To remember, diversity means that there's lots of different types of something, lots of different types of people, or perhaps a variety of different ideas and things like that. So that's what diversity means. So let's talk about diversity in the colonies. Again, looking at our timeline, you can see we're still in the early 1600s part. We're still in the colonization era. Okay, so between the time of 1607, which of course is when Jamestown was founded, and 1700, 250,000 Europeans migrated to the colonies. That's a lot of people, 250,000 people in just under 100 years. The population of North America by 1700 was 2.5 million. So think about that. 250,000 became 2.5 million, 2.5 million in just 100 years. 100 years is just a few generations if you think about it. Is, you know, a kid is born, they grow up, they have a kid, they grow up, they have a kid. That's maybe 3 or 4 generations in 100 years. So that's a lot of babies and everything that were had by those families and people that moved in. So to go from 250,000 to 2.5 million in just under 100 years is pretty amazing that that was able to happen. Most immigrants to the colonies were from England, but others began to come from other countries as well, such as Scotland, Ireland, and Germany in particular. So lots of different types of people moving into the colonies. Now let's talk about push factors and pull factors. If I push you, then that makes you leave away from me. Okay, so a push factor is what causes a person to leave a country, right? So a push factor is what causes a person to leave a country. After Scotland and England united in 1707, it made it easier for Scottish people to come to America, and most of those Scottish people settled in the Appalachian Mountains. There's a city up in North Carolina called Highlands, North Carolina. That's because the people that settled there came from the Highlands of Scotland. So a lot of Scottish people settled up in the mountains. Violence between warlords and high taxes were the main push factors that caused many Germans to come to America. And those are what caused them to want to leave. So in general, a push factor is going to be negative. It's what causes you to leave a place, while a pull factor is what draws you there. William Penn, as we talked about in the last lesson, invited many of those Germans to Pennsylvania. He said, "We want you to move here." That's a pull factor. It's what draws you to another place. So a push factor is what causes you to leave a country, and a pull factor is what draws you to another country. So diversity in the mid-Atlantic colonies, and naturally, we've already talked about this in the middle colonies. There's lots of diversity. Remember, New York is part of that. What's more diverse than New York City? It's a naturally diverse area. Remember, the Dutch initially settled there. They founded it. They called it New Netherlands, and then the city was New Amsterdam, and then of course the English came in and renamed it New York. But when the Dutch lived there, they allowed all kinds of people to move there, and they welcomed their cultures and their ideas. Swedish people, people from Finland, the Finnish people, Germans, Scottish, and French all begin to move to the middle colonies, and they're welcomed there. And as opposed to what you see in New England with the Massachusetts Bay colony, the Puritans, they don't allow new ideas to come in. So it works out better in the middle colonies. These groups had to learn to work together, though, and tolerate each other. When you've got a lot of different types of people around you and their ideas are foreign to you, you don't have to accept their ideas, but it's good to tolerate them and allow them to do their thing and you do your thing. And that's what diversity is all about. Elements of these various European cultures, from languages, their style of dress, their food, their architecture, that is the way they build houses, came together to eventually create a basis for a uniquely American culture. So all these different cultures begin to blend together and create a very unique culture right here in America. There was also a lot of religious diversity. They brought their religions with them as well from their different countries. Many different religious groups came to America seeking opportunity for the free practice of their faith. Puritans firmly established their religious values in New England, colonies of Massachusetts Bay, and at Plymouth. But they didn't allow others to practice theirs. So while they left England for religious reasons because they were being persecuted, they did not extend religious freedom to others who moved there. Maryland was originally established as a colony for Catholics so that they could worship freely. Remember, Lord Baltimore passed the Acts of Toleration in 1649, so it didn't matter if you were a Catholic or a Protestant, you could live there. They tolerated Catholicism, Protestantism, as I said, Judaism, and Quakers were all allowed there. Quakers primarily settled in Pennsylvania, though, where William Penn, its founder, was a Quaker, and they were also very tolerant of other faiths, and they treated the Native Americans very well also. Separation of church and state is an idea that's deeply ingrained in the United States. Now, this is not, there's a lot of interpretations of separation of church and state. But what this really means at the basis, you have to put it in context. Remember where these people came from. They came from England, where England had its own official church, the Church of England. Okay, you were supposed to be a member of that church. It's an official state or country-sponsored church, the Anglican Church. It goes all the way back to Henry VIII, who founded that church because he wanted a divorce, or he wanted an annulment, rather, and the Catholic Pope wouldn't give it to him. So he started his own church so he could give himself one, more or less. And that's the background that they come from. So what they mean by church and state is these people who come to America don't want an official religion. They want you to be free to practice a religion however you choose. So they don't want an official religion. That's all that means. So the diversity of religions, particularly in Rhode Island, where Roger Williams founded the First Baptist Church in America, and remember he had gotten kicked out of Massachusetts for being too tolerant, and Pennsylvania, meant that no one faith held the majority in those colonies. Therefore, no one religion became the established religion. You're not forced to participate in religion. And the American tradition of separating church and state was born from this religious diversity in the colonies. Now that phrase, separation of church and state, actually comes from a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist Association in Virginia many years after this, where he said that there should be a line of separation between church and state. But he doesn't say that church is a bad thing, or that you shouldn't say a prayer at this event or that event. He doesn't go into any of that. Again, put it in context. They're just saying that in this context, that there shouldn't be an established religion that you're forced to participate in. Now we also, according to Standard 2B, we need to talk about the African slaves and how they contributed to the diversity as well. They also brought much of their culture with them. Due to the need for cheap labor for cash crops and the decline of indentured servants, because indentured servants worked off their time, many slaves were brought to the Americas beginning in 1619 by the Dutch on the Middle Passage. You remember that'll be part of the triangular trade. The slaves were originally captured through the African slave trade within the African continent, brought to the west coast of Africa, and they were bartered with European slavers. That's what you call a person who slave trades, have a slave boat. They're called slavers. So they were traded with them for goods from Europe, the finished products and that sort of thing. You'll refer back to the first lesson about the triangular trade. Between 300 and 400 slaves were packed into cargo holds of slave ships that were bound for North America, and about 2 out of every 10 slaves died during the Middle Passage there in the beginning. You have to remember the Middle Passage was a grueling 3-month journey, 3,000 miles roughly, across the Atlantic Ocean from the coast of Africa to the Caribbean, where they would harvest things like sugarcane for rum production, or to go to Brazil for the same sort of thing, or to come to the Americas where they would work on tobacco, or they would eventually work in cotton, on cotton plantations. But The contributions of African slaves can't be discounted. There was no single African culture. Remember, Africa is not a country. Africa is a massive continent with lots of different countries and lots of different types of people. Lots of people from varying backgrounds that speak various languages and have various cultural aspects to their lives, music, clothes, all those sorts of things. And there's no single African culture, but the people brought from West Africa as slaves represented a large number of different cultures. So when they come together on the plantations, they're separated from the masters. They stay over in the slave quarters area, and they begin to blend aspects of their culture. So even though some of the slave masters might have wanted them to give up their culture, they don't do it. They very much keep their cultures, and they begin to adapt those cultures and contribute to the American culture as well. But the physical isolation of those slaves is what creates this new blended culture for the slaves, and rather than replacing their culture with a more European-centered culture, what results is the creation of a unique African-American or black culture, and you still see the fruits of that today, as they brought all kinds of things with them when they were brought to this country against their will. But foods such as okra and melons, remember, because of the Columbian Exchange, things are going to exist in the New World that never existed. Melons did not exist here. Cantaloupes, honeydew melon, watermelon, none of that stuff existed here. That was brought by way of the Columbian Exchange, by way of Africans to America. Yams or sweet potatoes, rice, even grits have been attributed to the blending of African and European cultures. The practice of blending different African tribes is once on a single plantation led to the creation of blended language patterns, such as the Creoles in Louisiana and the Gullah people off the coast of Georgia and the Carolinas. Perhaps you'll remember an old show on Nick Jr. called Gullah Gullah Island, where they were talking about well, basically it focused on this little family on this island that were descendants of slaves, and they had different language patterns. They had different language patterns and things like that. And also, that's based on something real. There are, on the Sea Island coast of Georgia and South Carolina, there are populations of people who are descendants of slaves who kept a lot of those traditions in place. And that's what that show was about. Economically, coastal South Carolina and Georgia owed its prosperity to the introduction of rice that was brought over by West African slave ships from the transatlantic trade, so rice is a big deal as well. And architecture was also owed to slave labor. Slave labor often built homes and buildings, and they were building it for their masters, and they would often do things the same way they did them back in Africa. And over time, traces of Africanism found their way even into the architecture of some of these buildings. For example, the shotgun-style home has been traced to the dwelling style that's popular in Haiti. If you look at this picture here, I don't know how well you can see it there, but the building itself is shaped like a shotgun in that all the doors are on the left side here of the building. So to keep it cool, you just open the doors all the way through the house, and the breeze would blow through and have a natural cool. Now, if it had a door open here and a door open there and a door open here, and it was kind of zigzag like that, it would be hard for the air to flow through. So instead, they keep all the doors on one side so that the breeze can blow right through the house and keep everyone cool, because we all know it's hot in the South. So this is an ingenious idea. It's shaped like the barrel of a gun for that purpose, and they call it the shotgun style house. But it's an ingenious idea brought over by African slaves. It's very simplistic, with its entrance being on the short side of the home, and it's different from European style homes. So they're one room wide. You're not going to see multiple rooms, with the exception of the bathroom there. And it's just very simple, and it works very well for air conditioning, so to speak, because they didn't have real air conditioning back then like we do now. Examples of self-governance and fighting authority. that has always been in American blood, is we want to rule ourselves. Thinking back to William Penn, he wanted them to have laws of their own making. Thinking back to the House of Burgesses in Virginia at Jamestown, the first example of elected legislature in America. The Mayflower Compact, the first basic real constitution set of laws in America in Plymouth, the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The way the Massachusetts Charter was revoked because the people in Massachusetts were ignoring the Navigation Acts. Bacon's Rebellion. As I said, Pennsylvania and William Penn's first written constitution, and wanted people to come up with their own laws. These are all examples of our desire to rule ourselves in America. This is self-governance and fighting authority. These are things that we value here in America. So with that, that's the end of this lesson on diversity in the colonies, diversity of ideas, and self-governance. Have a good day.